More on the Prime Minister and the Chancellor in just a moment. I'm sure the Chancellor will be interested in this story. Breaking news on inflation and a bigger rise than we were expecting today. Figures just in. Paul Kelso standing by for us, our business correspondent, of course. Hi, Paul. Tell us more.
Yeah, good morning, Kay. Chancellor still in office. The headache for the occupier of that office growing. Inflation in the year to March 2022 has risen to 7%. That's up 0.8% on the figure in March. It's ahead of most expectations. It's also ahead of where the Bank of England forecast they thought inflation would be around now. It's on course, heading towards a predicted peak above 8% later in the year. These figures are for March. They include, of course, the period of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and fuel prices are the biggest single contributor to this. Transport costs have gone up over 1% in the month. So that immediate impact on diesel and petrol prices that we saw following the invasion has fed straight through into the goods across the economy. Inflation now 7%.
Wow. Thank you, Paul. I know we'll chat about that throughout the course of the show. Thank you. Main story this morning, I'm sorry, but I'm staying. The message from the Prime Minister, who's standing firm amid calls to quit after being fined for breaking his own lockdown rules. The question now is, will he face further fines for 5 more events he's been linked to? His Chancellor too receiving a fine. Let's take a look back at the timeline of events for the events linked to Boris Johnson specifically. The Prime Minister has been fined for his birthday celebration on the 19th of June 2020, where it's claimed that up to 30 people attended a party with cake in the Cabinet Room. The previous month and on the 20th of May, about 100 staff from Number 10 were invited to a Bring Your Own Booze event in the Downing Street Garden. On the 13th of November, Mr Johnson gave a speech at the Leaving Do for his Director of Communications. On the same day, it's also alleged that Carrie Johnson hosted a party in the Number 10 flat. It's claimed there was a Christmas quiz at Number 10 on the 15th of December. The PM insists it was virtual. This event is not being investigated by the police. And 2 days later on, the 17th of December, it's believed Mr Johnson attended another event for a Number 10 official. On the 4th...
I've received a fixed penalty notice from the Metropolitan Police relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. And let me say immediately that I've paid the fine, and I once again offer a full apology. At that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules. But of course, the police have found otherwise, and I fully respect the outcome of their investigation. I understand the anger that many will feel that I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public.
Short straw this morning falls to Transport Secretary Grant Shapps. Mr Shapps, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We know it's going to be a challenging morning for you, but we appreciate you taking the time. At least 50 fixed penalty notices issued so far, potentially more to come. It appears that Downing Street has one of the highest crime rates in the country this morning. The PM has presided over that. How can he possibly remain in office?
Morning, Kay. Well, look, first of all, I know that the Prime Minister has apologised for this. You just heard him say he accepts responsibility and he's reorganised Number 10. But, you know, I, for one, as somebody who couldn't see my own dad for 4 months during this period, during lockdowns, whilst he was in hospital, and we didn't know that we'd see him again, completely understand the upset and anger that this causes, because I feel it myself. The one thing I know, and I spoke to the Prime Minister, is he is completely mortified by this happening. And we know now a lot more about the day itself as well, because we understand about the meetings that were going on, 8 separate meetings that day before the Prime Minister went out and visited a school and came back and by surprise, some of his team had arranged to wish him happy birthday. It shouldn't have happened. He's paid the 50 quid fine. That's the right thing to do. He's reorganised Number 10, and I think he's got a big job to do, particularly with the cost of living, inflation, those pressures, and of course all of that coming about because of the war in Ukraine. And I think he's shown terrific leadership with regard to the West's response to that war.
So far, he's presided over 50 separate rule breaks at Downing Street, including that of his wife and his Chancellor. Likely that more rule breaks will be recognised by the police to come, another 5 events that he reportedly attended. How can he possibly remain in office?
Well, look, everyone is human. People sometimes make mistakes. He wasn't there for the 50 events that you're referring to, of course, and many times he wasn't even in the building. He's human, and humans err, and sometimes they make mistakes, Kay, and that's what happened here. It's been a very high-profile job, and quite rightly, the police have investigated and independently come to their view. He's apologised. He's accepted responsibility. He's paid the 50 quid fine. The question, I suppose, your question goes to the heart of, did he set out to do this? Was this something that was done with malice, with intent? And the answer, of course, is no. It's something that happened in error. As I say, I've spoken to him. He's incredibly embarrassed by the whole thing. He knows that it was stupid, indefensible, but he didn't set out to break the law, and he's paid the fixed penalty notice fine, and has a very big job to do.
Yeah,
and
but he did break the law.
I accept somebody in the round.
Ignorance is no defence in law, is it?
That's right, Kay. But, as you know, so occasionally people erred on the wrong side of the law during lockdown. And, he has, quite rightly, paid the price, 50 quid in this case, and of course, reputational damage. But I suppose the question is...
Who should be responsible for the goings-on in Downing Street when on at least 50 separate occasions the law was broken, if not the Prime Minister?
Well, even when the Prime Minister wasn't there, he's already said he takes full responsibility.
So 50 times the law was broken.
And this was, I was going to say, this is 2 years ago, this particular incident. And, since then, he's completely reformed. Number 10, been very large changes, as you know, in personnel. But look, I don't think there's any... I personally, when I heard about these goings-on, was very upset. I didn't think I'd see my dad again. I think that a lot of people in the country will have felt the same way about it. It absolutely shouldn't happen. It's incredibly serious, and quite rightly, that's been recognised and fines been paid.
Who's responsible, Mr. Schaap? Who's responsible for at least 50 rule breaks, law breaks at Downing Street?
Well, obviously, individuals who
So not the Prime Minister. He doesn't have overall responsibility.
Of course he does.
OK, so he's responsible for 50 times the law being broken in Downing Street, and yet he still remains in honour. Where's his honour?
Many of those times he won't have been there, but nonetheless, he says himself he takes overall responsibility, and I think that's absolutely the right thing for him to do.
Yeah, it's the first time that a Prime Minister has broken the law in the history of the office, more than 300 years since Robert Walpole took office. He's brought the role into disrepute. Where's his honour?
Well, as I've said, I think he, in accepting and apologising and paying the fine and reforming Number 10 and getting on with the job, including in Ukraine, being one of perhaps the most proactive Western leader.
We're talking about Partygate, if we may, please, Mr. Schaap. We're not talking about Ukraine. We're talking specifically about Partygate this morning. Let's stay on topic. You're talking about reforming Downing Street. 5 people have resigned, 45 separate breaches. So Allegra Stratton's gone, Dan Rosenfeld's gone, Martin Reynolds have gone, Jack Doyle's gone, Kate Joseph's gone. 45 other breaches. Who's responsible for those? You say that he's reformed Downing Street. Only 5 people have gone. 50 breaches.
Well, that's clearly not true, because there are a number of other people who you haven't mentioned have gone, including Dominic Cummings, Lee Kane, and many others.
Are you saying that Dominic Cummings broke the rules?
Look, I'm not getting into specifics of anybody.
Well, you just did.
Saying there's more than 5. But I'm simply saying, Kay, there's more than 5 people who've gone. And the most important thing is, it's not just about who's come and gone. It's also about the fact he's now set up an office of the Prime Minister to specifically look after the way that the operation of Number 10 works. And I think it's worth understanding that in Number 10, the Prime Minister, who leads a particularly busy diary, of course, goes from one meeting to the next to the next.
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter.
Well,
doesn't matter. 50 separate. No, let me just put it to you. 50 separate occasions so far. The law has been broken in Downing Street. The Prime Minister set the law. The Prime Minister broke the law. The Prime Minister misled Parliament. Where's his honour?
Okay, by the same logic, anybody who broke a lockdown law wouldn't be in their job, would they? The point of this is that the Prime Minister
continually
has,
lying when we've made a mistake, continually lying when we've made a mistake, blaming others and not accepting responsibility. We know that people have done that in the past, is not a good look for a politician, for a public servant, especially the Prime Minister. Where's his honour?
It's not a good look for anyone, but he has not done that. What he's done is accepted full responsibility. You keep asking the same question. I want to make sure I've answered it absolutely, but I can't do it unless you let me get a word in. I want to absolutely answer it. The simple answer is he takes full responsibility for all those breaches, whether he was there or in the vast, vast majority of cases, not there. And
so on 50 separate occasions, the law was broken. Well. 50, and there will be more to come. We are told, or certainly led to believe by the police, including 5 separate events that the Prime Minister attended. This is just one event that he's been fined for, that his wife and his Chancellor were at. 5 other events as well. I could go through them if you want. I'm sure you're aware of them. If he receives more fines... If he receives more fines, and he then subsequently quite obviously misled Parliament both on the 1st of December and the 8th of December, when he was at the dispatch box, he should go. Where is his honour?
I appreciate that what you're doing is listing everything that you can, that you've got to list there, but I would prefer that we leave this to the police. I think they're the right people to come to conclusions on this.
And they've decided he broke the law.
What they have to say.
They've decided he broke the law.
And he's apologised, and he's accepted responsibility, and he's reformed number 10, and he's getting on with doing the job. And as I say, I completely get what you're saying, Kay, because I've been in the position myself of not being able to see my own family under these circumstances. I find it, I'm very annoyed by it. I find it, angers me greatly. I've spoken to the Prime Minister. He's mortified. But just to be absolutely clear, I think motive is very important in a situation like this. He didn't go out with malice to go and break the law. He was very, very...
He had a blatant disregard. He made the laws and he had a blatant disregard for them. 20th of May, bring your own booze party. 19th of June, he's already been fined for. 13th of November, party after Dominic Cummings and Lee Kane quit. 15th of December, Christmas quiz attended by the PM where there was booze and tinsel. 17th of December, 2 events there. 14th of January, leaving drinks the PM allegedly attended. That's not just, he made a mistake. That's 6 separate occasions. The law that he made, he was the policy maker, he broke the law. He then went to Parliament and said, don't know what you're talking about. It must have been them. It's not me. He was lying. He was hiding behind other people. They fell on their sword. And he continues to say that he's going to stay in office. Where is his honour?
You just listed a whole bunch of events in which the police have not, in fact, ruled as yet.
Not yet.
He didn't knowingly. So
if they rule against him with those other 5 events, will he go then?
Okay, here's the thing. He didn't knowingly break the law. He didn't do it deliberately. He didn't come to Parliament and having knowingly done this. He thought, in fact, that the same people who wished him happy birthday, who he'd already been meeting with earlier that day, was not breaking the law. The police take a different view. He absolutely accepts that and has paid the fine. I see what you're doing, which is to sort of list everything else that you've read in the newspapers that reported on. I think it's fair to allow the police to take a look at that rather than jump to all of those conclusions.
Okay, so let's follow that through then, should we? What will it take for the PM to leave office? Will it be more fines? Will that be the stage where he has to accept that he's not an honourable man?
Well, look, I don't agree, Kate. We live in a democracy and people have every right to vote to decide what happens with their representatives. I think a lot of people take the view that although something went wrong here, I think it's helpful if I can just get one answer out. I think a lot of people take the view that although this clearly went wrong, it's very serious. I don't seek to minimise it in any way, shape or form, not least because I feel pretty aggrieved about things myself, given not being able to see my own family. Most people look at this, understand that we're talking about an event nearly 2 years ago, that he's apologised, he's accepted responsibility, he's reformed number 10, and although you don't want to talk about this either, that he's getting on and helping to lead the West's response.
Well, because that's not the topic of discussion this morning.
And,
if you'll forgive me, I'm leading the interview, Mr. Shapps, and let me say, you brought up the fact that it was a democracy. 75% of the public, if I may, I wanted to respond to your suggestion that it's a democracy. 75% of the public, 75% of the public feel that he continually and deliberately lied. How can he remain in office as an honourable man? I'm guessing from what you're saying, you think he is an honourable man.
I do. And the last part of the point I was trying to answer is relevant here, even though you keep telling me it's not. People judge somebody in the round. They judge how they do their job overall. I'm not saying that the Prime Minister isn't a flawed individual. We're all flawed in different ways. We all err. The question is, did somebody set out to do these things with malice? And actually, overall, is he doing a good job as Prime Minister? Which is why I do think it's relevant how he performs the rest of his job, the rest of his task. And he made a mistake. It was embarrassing and stupid. The Prime Minister's mortified about it. But I think there's a big job for him to get on and do on behalf of the British people, on behalf of the world fighting this cruel war,
okay.
and that is why I judge him in the round. And
okay, you say you judge him in the round, but now, and I must let you go in a second because we're running out of time. You say you judged him in the round. He's already been sacked twice for lying. He slurred Hillsborough fans, suggesting that drunken fans were partially responsible for what happened in 1989. He was failing to be completely transparent about the Downing Street flat, charging £840 a roll for wallpaper when people can't put food in their kids' bellies. And then he allegedly promised a business interest for Jennifer Arcuri, who was his alleged lover. Let's judge him in the round.
He helped to make sure that this country received vaccines before any other country in the world, got the rollout and the booster done, got us out of lockdown before anyone else, gave us the fastest growing economy in the G7 last year, and is leading the world's response to President Putin, according to President Zelensky. I take somebody in the round, Kay, and I think that this Prime Minister has much more to give, and that is why, despite the fact that I think what happened was wrong, he has apologised, he's accepted responsibility, he's paid his 50 quid fine, and he's getting on with his very important job running the country.
Transport Secretary, thank you. Let's have a look what the papers think. People have a right to expect better. That's the Telegraph quoting Mr. Johnson himself from his latest apology. He has, however, again refused to resign. The Eye reminds us that it may not be over yet as far as the fines are concerned, and reports that 57% of people want the Prime Minister to resign. Don't they know there's a war on, the Mail asks, attacking what it calls the left, howling for resignations when there are more important things to consider. The Express says the Prime Minister has promised to do better for Britain in the future. The Star's view is clear, depicting both Mr. Johnson and Mr. Sunak as Pinocchio, complete with long noses. But the matter is far from over. The police are still investigating a number of other gatherings in and around Downing Street. Madeleine has gone down to Scotland Yard for us this morning. And good morning to you, Maddie. We're hearing there from the Transport Secretary. We need to allow the police to do their job. It continues.
Good morning, Kay. It does continue. It's 50 fines and counting, because we know there are 12 events, parties that the Metropolitan Police are investigating, and we've only had a couple of the outcomes, the fines issued so far. So that's 30, we think, from the Prime Minister's birthday party in June 2020, where the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, presented him with a cake. So they are now 3 of those fines, including the Prime Minister and his Chancellor, Boris Johnson. And that makes him the first Prime Minister to have been found to have broken the law in office. And what's shocking is it may not be the only time, because we think the Prime Minister was involved in 6 of those 12 parties being investigated, including the infamous Bring Your Own Booze garden party in May 2020, which the Prime Minister was pictured attending. And that seemed to be a more clear-cut example of the rules, the lockdown rules being broken. So certainly already one fine, but he could very well face more fines as the Met's investigations continue.
OK, thank you. Thanks a lot, Maddie. Later in the show, the Prime Minister's former Press Secretary Will Walden will join us to discuss Boris Johnson's Partygate fine. And still to come, we'll be speaking to the SNP leader as well in Westminster, Ian Blackford, who's calling for Boris Johnson to quit in the wake of the Partygate fines. We'll be speaking to the EU ambassador to Ukraine about what more the EU can do to help the country in its hour of need. And also speaking to the former pensions minister, and that's Baroness Altman, on the Partygate fines. US President Joe Biden describing Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine as genocide. Yesterday, it was claimed that the Russian army may have used chemical agents in Mariupol. Ukrainian fighters released footage of people alleged to have been affected, which caused victims to briefly pass out.
What we have right now, just the unusual symptoms, of unknown substance, and thank God the people were exposed to these substances for not.
Yes, I called it genocide because it's become clearer and clearer that Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of even being able to be a Ukrainian. And the evidence is mounting. It's different than it was last week. The more evidence is coming out of literally the horrible things that the Russians have done in Ukraine. And we're going to only learn more and more about the devastation. And we'll let the lawyers decide internationally whether or not it qualifies, but it sure seems that way to me.
Today, new aerial pictures have emerged which appear to show a build-up of Russian troops and equipment heading to the Donbass area. Ukraine says it's expecting a renewed assault on the region in the next few days. Jason standing by for us in southern Ukraine, Mykolaiv to be precise, this morning. Hi, Jason. Good morning to you. Genocide is what President Biden says.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's been looking at the evidence of what's been coming out of some of the horrific images. Obviously, we've seen some of the northern suburbs around Kyiv, and that's what his conclusion is. And I think the worry now for the US, and again, intelligence sources there, saying that they're expecting this push to come this week. And the satellite images that we've seen in western Russia of those troops massing dozens of vehicles, tanks, support vehicles, troops, tents, supplies. They're clearly gearing up in the west of Russia to move into the Donbass. And the satellite images as well in the Donbass of around a convoy of around about 200 vehicles heading through there. That's where the main thrust of this new push, this new phase is going to happen. There's no doubt about that. The question is how successful it will be. Will it then push up to places like Kharkiv and possibly along the southern coast as well? Obviously, we've seen what's happened in Mariupol. Bombings there again continuing this morning. But will they push further along to places like Mykolaiv here? There has been activity in Mykolaiv here even this morning. Some of the villages, we're told there were attacks there, but they have been repelled. So we're just now waiting really for this onslaught to begin.
OK, thank you, Jason. The Mayor of New York has called for a change in the US gun laws after a subway shooting which left 10 people injured. The attack began as a train pulled into the station, causing panic on the platform. Smoke billowed from one of the carriages and commuters desperately tried to escape the gunfire. Some passengers braved the danger, tending to the wounded where they'd fallen. First responders arrived to a chaotic scene. Multiple casualties and a gunman at large. Police identified 62-year-old Frank James as a person of interest and offered a $50,000 reward for information. They said a gun they found had been fired 33 times. More misery for people hoping to travel from Dover over Easter. P&O Ferries, the company which unlawfully sacked 800 workers without notice last month, had hoped to resume crossings between Dover and Calais on Good Friday. But it's confirmed that it's the ship the Spirit of Britain, which has failed a number of key safety tests and was declared not fit to be cleared for sea. A judge has praised the commitment of Insulate Britain protesters who disrupted the journeys of thousands of people on the M25 by sitting across one of the busiest junctions. The judge, Stephen Leake, said the 12 activists had inspired him to reduce his own environmental impact, but he fined them hundreds of pounds, saying he had to apply the law. And after more than 2 years of strict COVID isolation, New Zealand is reopening its international borders. It's a staged process. Today, it's open to vaccinated Australians, but from next month, people from the UK and the United States will also be able to visit. Nicole is in Wellington for us. We put her on a plane, and there she is. Hi, Nicole. How was it?
Well, it's certainly been a long haul for New Zealand to get here. As you said, it's been closed for over 2 years, not only to all international travellers, but it's been incredibly difficult for even people from New Zealand to return home. And they've really only been able to do that in the last few weeks without a full hotel quarantine. But now New Zealand is opening up to the rest of the world, starting with Australians who are able to enter. And from next month, people from the UK, from the US and other European countries will be able to come here as well. New Zealand's COVID-19 strategy has been this go early, go hard policy, and it managed to succeed for quite a long time. They beat COVID-19 twice. They had, for a long time, barely any deaths, very few lockdowns. They were considered the gold standard, the envy of the world. But even New Zealand could not defeat Omicron when it hit the shores, and now they are getting around 10,000 cases a day. They've had over 500 deaths, and they've decided that it's time to open up. A number of flights are starting to arrive. We've got a bit of a lull here at the moment. You can see there has been a welcoming committee arranged to try and greet Australians and New Zealanders who are coming home. Also, that's the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, there right behind me. She's about to give a media interview, and she's come here also to greet people and to try to say that New Zealand's shores are open. But it's still been a controversial policy here. Sorry?
Yeah, I wondered if you could, Nicole, can you just, I mean, she's not yet started. Tell her you're live and see if she wants to have a quick chat with us. Go on, I dare you. Go
okay,
on.
All right, let's try that. Jacinda Ardern, would you like to speak with Sky News at all? Afterwards?
Tell you live.
Just doing a live
afterwards, we'd love to hear you in the UK.
Just
Okay, all right. Well, hopefully she will afterwards. So, Kay, hopefully we can bring Jacinda Ardern for a conversation with Sky News. But yeah, it's been a controversial policy here in New Zealand. We've had a number of big protests in February. We saw people out on the streets in cities across the country fed up with all these COVID restrictions.
OK, Nicole, thank you. Now, it's one of Hollywood's bitterest battles. Actors Johnny Depp and Amber Heard will be in court again today in what lawyers call a mudslinging soap opera. Mr Depp is suing his ex-wife for $50 million after she accused him of domestic violence during their marriage. But she is counter-suing him for $100 million. Martha Kellner has more.
At a courthouse in Virginia, one of Hollywood's ugliest and most enduring legal battles is rolling into town. Behind the curtain, actor Amber Heard travelling to another court date with her ex-husband, one of film's biggest stars.
Mr Depp, how are you feeling?
He may be feeling buoyant for now, but bruising weeks in court await Mr Depp. He is suing over this article written by Ms Heard, in which she recounts her experience as a survivor, she says, of sexual violence. Johnny Depp isn't mentioned by name, but he says it's plainly about him. His lawyer explaining why he's seeking $50 million in damages.
For nearly 30 years, Mr. Depp built a reputation as one of the most talented actors in Hollywood. Today, his name is associated with a lie, a false statement uttered by his former wife, the defendant Amber Heard, that falsely cast Mr. Depp, falsely and unfairly cast Mr. Depp as a villain.
Ms Heard, in turn, is countersuing for $100 million. She says she was physically, emotionally and sexually abused during their tumultuous relationship.
He takes 8 to 10 tablets of ecstasy almost immediately. And the next 3 days are just a cycle of very, very, very violent activity by him. He rips off her nightgown. He has her jammed up against a bar. He has hurled bottles and bottles at her. He has dragged her across the floor on the broken bottles and the liquor.
You may have a sense of déjà vu, and that's because what we've heard today and what we'll hear for the next 7 weeks is very familiar. It's similar to a court case in London in 2020 in which Johnny Depp was suing the Sun newspaper for libel. He lost that case, the judge deciding that there was enough evidence to support their description of him as a wife-beater. This trial is the sequel, another attempt at reputation damage limitation. And despite more grisly details of his private life, many of Depp's fans are standing by him. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Virginia.
Now, you're very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News this morning. The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, he's been defending the Prime Minister on the accusations that he presided over at least 50 separate breaks of the law in Downing Street, amongst other things. This is what Mr Shapps had to say this morning. 50 separate... No, let me just put it to you. 50 separate occasions so far... The law has been broken in Downing Street. The Prime Minister set the law. The Prime Minister broke the law. The Prime Minister misled Parliament. Where's his honour?
What he's done is accepted full responsibility. You keep asking the same question. I want to make sure I've answered it absolutely, but I can't do it unless you let me get a word in. I want to absolutely answer it. The simple answer is he takes full responsibility for all those breaches.
Is the EU likely to allow Ukraine to join the Union, the European Union? President Zelensky has applied for a fast-track membership, but the EU enlargement process is very slow-moving, taking years rather than months. So let's speak to the EU ambassador to Ukraine, and that's Matti Masakis. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. Could joining the EU be fast-tracked for the Ukraine?
Good morning. Indeed, the Ukraine's EU path has started, and it has started with an unprecedented speed. What is normally been done in 2 years or over 2 years period is now attempted within 3 months. Namely the first assessment by the European Commission of Ukraine's compliance with the basic criteria for membership, namely working democracy and working market economy. And we expect, or that's the working assumption, to hear more in June.
What more, in the meantime, can the EU do, the countries of the EU, to help Ukraine?
To step up what we are doing, sending weapons. It was very clear what the chief of EU's foreign policy, Josep Borrell, said after his and President von der Leyen's visit to Kiev last week. We need to help Ukraine to prevail on the battlefield. And the EU is doing that, providing exactly the weapons that Ukrainians are requesting. The EU is providing massive humanitarian assistance, and the EU has repurposed its all projects and programs in Ukraine, yearly worth of at least 200 million to strengthen Ukraine's resilience.
Do you know anything more about these suggestions that we were hearing yesterday about chemical weapons attacks in Ukraine? Do you have any further information on that?
This information is not confirmed. We, of course, are all reading the reports. President Zelensky speaking tonight said as well that it's not yet fully confirmed. Yeah, of course, doing our everything, which is very difficult given the circumstances in the besieged Mariupol, to get confirmation on the use of chemical weapons. It would be, of course, another heinous war crime.
What more can the EU do? Are sanctions enough for now? Or do they need to consider taking military action to support the people of Ukraine? Just hearing from the Deputy Defence Minister saying it's not yet safe for civilians to return to places including Kiev.
I did return to Kiev late last week, and other diplomatic missions are returning. And of course, one sees awful lot of people returning to Kiev. Kiev is home. Kiev means jobs, and shops and restaurants are slowly opening up.
Yeah. Would you advise fellow Ukrainians to come home yet?
This is not for me to advise. This is for the Ukrainian authorities. I did return because in diplomacy, most added value comes from the presence, and one needs to be, as a diplomat, one needs to be on the ground in Kiev, in direct contacts with the Ukrainian authorities.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for joining us on the programme this morning. We do appreciate it. Do keep well and keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meantime, back home, domestic politics. Let's find out more about the impact of rising inflation and the increasing cost of living. Inzi standing by for us in Manchester this morning. Hi, Inzi. Inflation even higher than expected.
Yeah, a 30-year high, Kay, and a lot of people will be looking at that and thinking, how on earth are we expected to afford very basic things? We know the cost of living crisis has been worsening, and today it takes yet another hit. This new announcement today takes into account the month of a war in Ukraine. It takes into account fuel prices, food prices going up as well, and really paints a bleak picture of the future in terms of finances for everyday people. We're in Manchester's Smithfield Market, and we've got Mariella with us here, who owns this it's not too fishy actually, a fish stall here.
Fresh fish doesn't smell.
Well, there we go. Mariella, just give us your reaction to hearing the news this morning that inflation has hit a 30-year high.
Well, I'm not surprised at all. It's been increasing since the beginning of Brexit, and we've had whammy with Brexit, we've had COVID, and now we are suffering this terrible injustice of the Russian war. All our costs since just pre-Brexit have been steadily rising, and I would say that the import costs on the fish from abroad, at least 25 to 30%. We sell a lot of poultry, which is based in this country, in Penrith, our main poultry supplier, and his costs have gone up because, of course, they've stopped the farmers using the red diesel. There's been bird flu. The cost of delivering from Penrith to here every day is costing him another £250 to £350 just for the increase in diesel.
And so when we talk about the cost of living crisis, people coming here, you know, want to buy fish for their business, for personal use and things like that. What are people telling you when you're having to put your prices up as well as a result?
We've tried as much as we possibly can to swallow as much of that, but we just can't. It's an impossibility. When every delivery is costing you an extra 20%, we don't make that. We're wholesalers, and when we retail out, we don't put a massive profit on. You know, it's 10%, it's 15%, and these are people that are struggling. These people that can. The reason they're here is because for between £15 and £20, they can fill their freezer of good quality item. And every time we import this stuff, because it comes across the sea, well, the container prices have gone up by 5 times. So they've gone from 3,500 to 14,000. This is a knock-on situation. So they've got to contend with the gas and the electricity, the food prices going up, travel going up. What are they supposed to choose? Do we eat or do we heat? and it's disgraceful.
Yeah, it's a very tough question for a lot of people across the country now. Mariella, thank you so much, just painting a picture there of what it's like for her as a business, but also for the customers that come and shop here. Now, the Bank of England have also said that the inflation could increase later this year to a 40-year high later on this year to 10%. Now, that really would be an even bleaker picture for many across the country, but today's news already, many will be looking and thinking whether they do eat or heat, and that is a big question for many across the country.
OK, Inzi, thanks very much. Thank you. More now on the Downing Street party's row and the fines that have been handed out to the Prime Minister and also to the Chancellor and indeed the Prime Minister's wife, amongst others. So Ros Altman is standing by for us this morning to talk about it in more detail. What would be the honourable thing, Ms Altman, for the Prime Minister to do?
Well, obviously, those kind of decisions are up to the Prime Minister and Tory MPs. But I think many people around the country are going to feel very anxious to learn that when they were behaving in accordance with the rules made by the government, that the government itself, many people at the top, and it's not just the Prime Minister, but so many people in Downing Street, seemed to believe that the rules were optional, and they decided not to keep them, or they didn't think carefully enough about whether it was appropriate to do so. And this is just the beginning. You know, we have lots of people who seem to have played fast and loose with rules that were imposing dreadful hardships on people around the country. I was not in favour, and I'm still not in favour, and hope we never again have draconian restrictions on people's intimate personal lives, forbidding them from seeing family, loved ones, children, even when there are heartbreaking situations. This is the first of a number of so-called parties being investigated. And, you know, I think it is shocking to see the police issuing fines. But I do, however, understand that in the middle of a war and with a cost of living crisis and with so much else happening around the country and around the world, that the urgency of immediate reaction may not be the best course. But I'm sure a large number of Tory MPs are thinking to themselves about what their constituents are going to be feeling and saying when they see this. Some people will say, well, it doesn't matter, you know, I never kept to the rules, so that's okay. But most people around the country, certainly everyone I know, was pretty much keeping to the rules and wouldn't have dreamt of getting together with family or with friends to celebrate their birthday in numbers.
OK.
So
let me come back to you, Baroness Altman, if I may, on one of those points when you're talking about the fact what we're looking over, we're looking south and we're south-east, and we're looking at what's happening as far as Ukraine is concerned, and that there is a war there at the moment. The Prime Minister needs to focus on that. But, you know, we did change Prime Ministers during the Second World War. We did change Prime Ministers during the Gulf War. We've seen financial crises before. The question surely has to be whether the British public see our present Prime Minister, incumbent in Downing Street, as an honourable man. There are elections, May elections, coming up just around the corner.
Well, that will be a very interesting test as to what the public believe. I believe that this is wrong. The Prime Minister is in the middle of further investigations, and I'm hoping that we will also get the Sue Gray report. I can't defend the gatherings, parties, whatever you want to call them, that were happening seemingly in a social setting with alcohol and with music in some cases. but that does also need to come out. We need to hear what went on, who was there. The fact that it's both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor who seem to have broken the law in this way does create even more of a problem. And I think the problem we have is within the political establishment, the public are losing trust and faith in the decency and the honour and the integrity shown by the people who seek to lead our country. At the last election, we had, I think, the most terrible choice between, a leader who was very much in favour of Brexit and a leader who was of the opposition at the time, who was promoting all sorts of policies that most of us clearly couldn't support. And indeed, when you look at what's happened in Russia, you have to believe that, we got the right outcome. This is a very dangerous world, but I believe in truth, honesty, and integrity. And I also hope that the moral fibre of our country will be restored. At the moment, I think there is a question mark over the integrity and the trust that can be placed in the people at the top. And we have to be able to trust them. Certainly, we've had an apology. That is welcome. Certainly, I think there has to be a reckoning in Parliament. At the moment, Parliament's in recess. That is a shame because this needs to be properly aired. And, it is very difficult for the country to see that while they have been experiencing the most awful privations, when loved ones were dying, they couldn't see them. When they wanted to celebrate marriages, they couldn't do so. All of these things are quite incredible when you think what we've done and the impositions imposed on the British people. But I do not believe we can have a situation where the public wonders whether this particular law is one that they should actually keep or whether everyone else is going to break it, so they might as well break it too. That cannot
Baroness
be.
Altman, I'm so sorry. We must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us on the programme this morning. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
We've got some breaking news now concerning cladding, and the government has revealed plans to see the industry contribute £5 billion to address the building safety scandal. In a victory for leaseholders, Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove has agreed a solution with the housing industry that will see developers commit a minimum of £2 billion to fix their own buildings. Industry will also pay up to a further £3 billion through an expansion to the building safety levy. Under the new agreement, which will become legally binding, more than 35 of the UK's biggest home builders have pledged to fix all buildings 11 metres plus that they have played a role in developing in the last 30 years. Now then, have a look at this when it comes to Partygate.
I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times. All guidance was followed completely during number 10. I can tell you that the guidelines were followed at all times. This is where I live and it's where I work. Those were meetings of people at work, talking about work.
The SNP leader at Westminster, Ian Blackford, is with us now. Hello to you, Mr. Blackford. Thank you for joining us on the programme. OK, it's embarrassing for the Prime Minister. It's embarrassing for the Chancellor, but it's done now, and they've got other things to worry about.
No, I wish that were the case, but it's not. And I hope that Conservative MPs listen to the likes of Ros Altman and to Dominic Grieve, that I think speak about the real threat to our public life when you've got a Prime Minister, and you just showed with your clip there, that blatantly lied to the House of the Commons, not just once or twice, but repeatedly. This is the first Prime Minister that's been found to break the law. And he's walking away from his responsibilities. He's not accepting responsibilities. I wrote to him yesterday saying that he should be recalling Parliament. We need to be meeting this week, and he should be coming to offer his resignation. He has overstepped the mark. And, from the point of view of process in Parliament, if you willfully mislead Parliament, then it's not a question of ifs or buts. It isn't a question about any dubiety. You must resign. And he cannot simply argue that he didn't know that these events were parties. Good grief. This was partying on an industrial scale that was taking place at Westminster. It wasn't just, as he's tried to say in his statement, he was breaking the rules. No, Prime Minister, you weren't. You were breaking your own laws. And you were breaking the laws others had to adhere to.
But Mr. Blackford, you know, we were in the middle of a global pandemic. The Prime Minister and his team were doing their level best, working 24/7 to try and get us a vaccine to protect us from COVID-19. We were seeing millions of people dying around the world. We were certainly one of the first, if not the first country in the world to have that vaccine. That was what the Prime Minister presided over. He might have had a drink, you know, he might have celebrated when it was his birthday. He might have had a drink in the garden to thank staff for what they were doing. And now he has to deal with a war in Ukraine. He was there risking his own life just a couple of days ago. And in addition to that, we can see inflation is at the highest level in decades. Come on, he just needs to stay in office and try and get us through this.
No, he needs to leave office, because when millions of other people were making so many sacrifices, couldn't be with their loved ones, couldn't be with their loved ones when they were dying. And you had this culture in Downing Street of partying. Let's not forget that image of the Queen sitting on her own, her husband's funeral, and the night before, a party taking place within Downing Street. They simply don't get it. And he and those around him think that the rules don't apply to them, that they can do as they please. And quite frankly, it isn't good enough. There has to be morality. There has to be ethics in public life. And there has to be the set of circumstances that when you cross the line, as he did, as those around him did, 50 people in his operation have been fined. Somewhere along the line, there has to be responsibility. Somewhere along the line, he has to put his hand up and say, look, I have done wrong. I need to accept that under those circumstances, I have forfeited the right to govern. I have forfeited the right to lead.
OK, but 50 fines so far. There may well be more. That's certainly what we're being led to believe by the Metropolitan Police. But I think it was Dennis Healey who once said that you don't examine your entrails in the midst of battle. And quite literally, we have a good relationship via the Prime Minister with the Ukrainian president. Now is not the time, even if you feel that he needs to go, now is not the time for that to happen.
It's cross-party unity that we stand with our friends in Ukraine, that we stand with President Zelensky. Of course, we stand with our allies in that as well. We call out for Putin for what he is, a warmonger, a war criminal. But the idea that we need the Prime Minister to do that is just simply bogus. Let's not forget that the United Kingdom changed Prime Minister in both the First and the Second World War. This man is a stain on our democracy. We need to show that united front. I and other opposition leaders work extensively with Ben Wallace, the Defence Minister, but just reflect on this, Loki, that the previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, anytime she went to a NATO summit, would come back and make a statement in the House of Commons. This man that's saying he's leading the fight against Ukraine went to a NATO summit 2 weeks ago and did not come back to Parliament. He doesn't discharge his responsibilities. For him, number 10 is a personal plaything. And we've seen over the course of the last few years, everything that's gone on, illegally proroguing Parliament, lying to the Queen, the dodgy COVID contracts, stuffing his pals that give money to the Tories into the House of Lords. This man doesn't understand how he should behave as Prime Minister. And this insult to the people of the United Kingdom, by lying to Parliament repeatedly, the first Prime Minister that breaks the law, quite simply, he has to go. There's no ifs or buts. He has to go.
OK, if it's not about... So let's talk about Brexit then, should we? For, you know, whatever your view is on Brexit, we are where we are. We need the trade deals in order to get our economy back up and running again. We've seen what interest rates are doing. The Prime Minister needs to straddle the world stage and show that we are a force to be reckoned with. He doesn't need people bickering with him because he had a can of beer or whatever it was for his birthday.
It wasn't about a can of beer. It was about a culture of partying. You know, when it comes to Brexit, myself and others told them that we needed to have a proper trading relationship with the European Union. We talked about, for us, our compromise with the single market and the customs union. He's now got the shambles of the Northern Ireland Protocol that's leading to all sorts of problems because he did a deal that quite simply doesn't fit the needs of UK businesses and UK consumers. But he's responsible for that. He created that. And what he needed to do was to make sure that he worked with others, to make sure that he wasn't going to do untold damage to the UK economy as he's now doing.
Nevertheless, he is where he is, and it doesn't look as though he's moving anytime soon, because that is up to the Conservative backbenchers, and they are decidedly quiet at the moment. If not him, though, then whom?
Well, you know, this is the tragedy of the whole thing, because it is up to the Conservative MPs. But they need to do their job. They need to understand that the public want the Prime Minister to go. Now, we should have been doing that this week. I hope that the Prime Minister comes to Parliament next week. There's a suggestion he might even be away on a trade trip to India. The Prime Minister needs to come to the House of Commons. We need to have that ability to hold him to account. And Conservative MPs need to recognise that they have that responsibility. They have the moral authority to remove this man that's lied to Parliament, lied to the public, broken the law. They now need to stand up and they need to accept their own responsibilities. Don't run away from this, because at the end of the day, if they do, the public will seek their revenge on someone that can't be trusted in public office.
And you cannot accept for 1 second that was then, it was the middle of a pandemic. He was doing his level best along with his team to try to keep the country safe. And by having a glass of wine or a karaoke here and there, if indeed the Prime Minister was attending that, or a beer and a glass and a piece of cake for his birthday that lasted less than 9 minutes, the only thing that he's had a fine for so far, you can't forgive him for that? You can't find it in your heart to forgive him for that?
16 different events, I think it was, that took place over a number of months in Downing Street. It's that culture. It's that the rules didn't apply to the Prime Minister and his team. The rules were for the little people, for the rest of us. Frankly, it was the contempt, the disregard that's shown for the public. And that very important aspect, that people couldn't grieve properly, couldn't hug their loved ones, and a Prime Minister that couldn't care because he was going to carry on partying.